Okay, so let's take it from the top. We're in Siman Kov Ches. We're up to Sif Beis. We're learning the halachas of Pesach. This is the third year. Yeah, last time we met, it's a little bit ago, so maybe we don't remember, but we discussed the idea of matzah shmura, different stages. Now we move on. You harvested your wheat. You bring it in. You go through your bundles, and over there, when you get there, you'll notice that there's a whole process in the what we were mentioning about the way they used to do it in the Babich. That over there, it says over there how they would after they harvested it, they would dry it in the field itself and bring it in, and they would make sure overnight it was indoors, and then bring it back outdoors. The whole thing. Either way, the point is you go through your wheat and chitim shenimtzu behem mevukos or mitzumachos. That you go through your grain. So you haven't made it into wheat yet. And you see some of them are cracked and some of them have sprouted. Sprouted means it's chametz gamar. It started to ferment. You don't have to make it into flour for it to become chametz. Even the grains, like we said already yesterday, that you want to harvest it while it's still a little bit moist. You don't want to harvest it when it's too dry, even though it's still connected to the ground, because there's already a chash that if it doesn't need the ground, it could become chametz. Now, but pile, would it be? I don't know, but there's definitely an opinion that says that. So we harvest it earlier while it's still green. So here also, if it comes into contact with water, mevukos means it started to split, which is probably a suffix if it actually became chametz or not. Mitzumachos, which is when it's already sprouted, that's already chametz. So the halacha would technically be hashar mutter. Technically, there's nothing wrong with the rest. If moisture falls on the top of your pile and a few of them sprout, there's nothing wrong with the rest of them. They're separate pieces, they're not connected, so there's no issue. But, so what you should do is, you should try to sift them out. This is a chumrah that you try to sift out the ones that are sprouted. And this way, if you know you took them out, then everything else is good, you don't have to worry about it. But if you can't do that or you didn't or whatever, so your other option would be tzrichim ledaktek hetiv. You should measure carefully or be aware 100%. In yesham al kol panim shishim keneged hamuvukos v'hamitzumachos. You should know for sure that you have 60 times against it. This is all talking about before Pesach. Before Pesach, you could still be mevatel hametz. On Pesach itself, we know that it's isur b'mashehu, so you can't do anything about it. If one drop and the whole thing, it's done. But if it's before Pesach, you could be mevatlet. So if you could get rid of them, take them out, they're grains, they're identifiable. That's the best way. If you can't, at least make sure you have 60 against it, and this way, and why would that help you? It's going to come Pesach, and you're going to have a little bit of chametz there. So what's the difference? So he explains, we bring from the Alter Rebbe, where the Alter Rebbe explains further, or whatever they're quoting, that v'oz mutter litchoin hakol biyacha. If you have 60 against it, then you could grind it all into flour before Pesach. Okay, we'll see soon why that helps you. If you're a Baal Nefesh, you should not be satisfied with just grinding it before Pesach, but you should also bake it before Pesach. Baal Nefesh means someone who's scrupulous in the mitzvahs. Scrupulous. Because of this chash, therefore, it became the minig that all matzahs baked before Pesach. In other words, the Sfardim, till today, some of them still bake matzah on Pesach. Ashkenazim, we don't bake matzah on Pesach, we do it all before. And a lot of it has to do with this. And this is what I started to explain. Bittul only works before Pesach. On Pesach itself, Isser, a chametz is Isser Mashu. That means you can never get rid of it. If there's even a tiny bit, you're done. Now, so why is grinding it not good enough? You make it into flour, so it becomes one big mixture before Pesach. So what's the problem? So there are some opinions that say that bittul only works by a liquid. Liquid, everything mixes together. By dry foods, you can, and this you'll learn when you come to smicha, especially if it's a more of a chashuva thing or a chaticha, or a liskaved or a berry, all these different qualifications. But the point is that when it's dry pieces, they're separate from each other. So even though you can't find it, how do you say it's buttle? If it's a liquid, you could say everything mixes together. When it's a single piece that technically you could find, so there are those who would say that's not called bittul, even if it's before Pesach. So according to them, the only way you can get away with this little bit of sprouted grain would be either like the first case was if you got rid of it, that's the best. But if not, and you already ground it all together, the only way they would say you could take care of it is if you bake it before Pesach. So now that you've baked it before Pesach, it becomes one glump. And once it's one glump, then it could be batal b'shishim before Pesach. So therefore, that's why the Alter Rebbe says the minig became, which is accepted by everyone, that all matzah is baked before Pesach. This way, you never have to rely or bypass this opinion that even though it's a dry solid, right? Therefore, it should never be batel. But you already baked it. So if you already baked it, you don't have any issues. So that's basically where it comes from. Yeah. What else could you do with it?
Bring Christmas, then make pasta.
Yeah.
So why so oh so if you bake this, you should bake it into matzah itself, which you wouldn't do anyway.
No, you would have, but you could have also baked it into matzah on Pesach itself. Technically, what's the problem with making matzah on Pesach? You're allowed to bake. You're allowed to, and there's an inyan to have matzah baked.
That doesn't make Shabbos.
No. There's two different things. You're allowed to bake on Yom Tif. Now, there are certain things we don't want you to do if you could have done before. So we ask, you're not supposed to do things that you could have done days before. But baking or cooking or anything like that, fresher is better. Even though matzah, some matzah you have is a year older. I don't know. I have matzah that's a year older in my house. I'll see if I use it this year. Matzah doesn't go bad. But in theory, anything fresh is better. So on Yom Tif, you're allowed to bake. You can't start a fire, so you have to have a previous fire, whatever. But it's not a problem. So if you have flour, and they still do it till today, the Sfardim do that. They'll have flour that's shmurah flour, and they'll just bake. Lafa, whatever they call it. I mean, it's matzah, but it's like they bake it on. Not most Sfardim don't do it anymore. But say again. So one second. So they are very careful to do it within 18 minutes. They do everything properly. They don't have chametz, right? The Sfardim. Ashkenazim. The reason why we don't. One of them is for this. There's other reasons probably also. We're afraid what happens if you mess up. But part of the reason would be this, that there's sometimes the flour itself may have come in contact with some sort of moisture. As we'll see as we go through the Siman, there's a lot of stages where that can happen. So if you grind it before Pesach and you baked it before Pesach, then even if there was, it's totally batel and you don't have any problem. There are some people that don't eat the mashal sugar on Pesach. So they'll do what's called sugar water. What is sugar water? You take sugar before Pesach and you boil it. What does it help you? You're using the same sugar on Pesach. What's the difference? The difference is that you boiled it before. So, and then you sift it, strain it, you make sure there's no pieces. But fine, that's a detail. But even if there was something there, it was batel b'shishim before Pesach. If you can't do that on Pesach. But, yeah.
And then how come there's some people that make cakes, doesn't only apply to flour? Because almond flour cakes, they also need water.
No, that's something else. So that but that's not flour. That's not real flour. We call it flour. It's not actual flour. It can't become chametz. Yeah, it's true, but it can become chametz. So there are those, by the way, when it comes to potato starch. So there are those that won't use potato starch. Now, I mean by those, I mean like the big paiskim of Amal, Shalom Zalman Auerbach and things like that. And Moshe Feinstein, they wouldn't eat it themselves. But no one said there's no problem with making flour or what we call potato starch and using it to make people make cakes out of it all the time. There's no issue. The problem is maybe we'll get, I don't know if the problem is chametz. The problem is fermenting or whatever you want to call it. Chimutz. I don't know, whatever the English you say fermenting. No, well, no. Chimutz is a fermentation process of just a flour that it starts to sprout and the enzymes change. Whatever. It's beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here, but it only applies to that. It doesn't apply to other things, which is why technically kitnius, which are beans and things like that, it's not chametz. We're very, very machmir not to have it, but it's not chametz. Yeah, rice, exactly. We went to this a little bit last time. It's not a grain, only 5 grains. Okay, let's leave it. Let's listen to this for now. We'll leave it because it's from the Torah. That's what the Torah says. Chimutz only applies to those. Yeah.
No, well, I don't eat kitnius.
That's a minute that's been accepted by everyone because it looks very much like flour and people confuse it and it becomes it has that same texture and things like that. Potato starch it's different. It's the actual potato and it doesn't look the same. And even then, there were some that would say, also I don't know if they had potatoes in the times of Chachamim. So if they would have had it, maybe it would have been part of kitnius. They weren't discovered. They were here in America. I don't know if they're
I love eating molasses.
Molasses is I don't know what is it? It's like you make sugar out of it. No, it's like as I say, right? So I don't know. You have to know what it's made from. If it's kitnius, then no, I don't know what it's made from.
It's full cock.
Okay, so I can't answer it then. I'd have to look it up. I imagine not because I don't know that I've seen it around. But okay, let's go weiter. Second paragraph in base for those that have the new print. Then he says like this, which means that b'diavad it would be okay. But you should also, if you had grains that rodents ate from, so then you should technically treat it the same way. In other words, it's not really the same way. The spit from the mouth of the rodents does not really become chametz. Only lechatchila were chayshish for it. Last case that we mentioned was that the actual grain got moist from something and it started to sprout or split. Here, what we're saying is that if a rodent eats from it and it has its mouth as it does it, so you're afraid that technically it's possible the spit from the animal might have the same qualities as water and start the fermentation process, or when it comes into contact with water, it'll be a faster process and make it chametz. So these are chashas, these are concerns. It's not real in a sense to the same degree as water, and that's why he says only lechatchila, that it's preferred. That's the way we treat it. But technically, it wouldn't be the same strip because it's not actual chametz. Now, what would be so what should you do? So number one, do the same thing. Take away the ones that may have gotten wet from the rodent, which I mean, I think you might have other issues if you have rodents running around your grain, but whatever. First, you take away the ones that got wet, or you make sure that you have 60 against it and you do it before, the same exact process. Now, again, here will be more mekel b'diavad because it's not actual chametz. It's only chshash of chshash, but still we treat it the same way. Now, what about in transportation? So you have the grains that come on a ship, or you have them sitting inside of pits or wells where you sort of store them. So if you look at them and you see that they're still dry and hard, in other words, nothing really happened to them, and they didn't start to sprout or split or anything. So kshedes, it's kosher. You don't assume something happened. Maybe you didn't transport it in the best way. Maybe you did. But you don't have to assume something happened. And therefore, it will be okay. If it changed or something happened, then you have to treat it as if it would be the same thing. Let's say you have it stored on the second floor, the roof. And it rained. It was very rainy, and there was a leak. In a few spots, water dripped in. And it actually made them wet. So then asuris. So then it becomes chametz. It's usur. It would be a big problem. And here you can't apply the rules that we said before of mitzumachos or this or that, because there it was a few pieces. You saw them, you found them, you took them out. Here, it leaked in a bunch of places. You don't know how far the leak went, so who knows what became chametz. And therefore, in this case, you shouldn't use this. And you're not even allowed to keep it on Pesach for after. It's real chametz. But let's say it was only a very controlled leak. It was in one particular area, wasn't over the whole roof, or a little bit of snow or something like that. But again, it was very controlled in very specific areas. So then you treat it the same way like the sprouted ones. You remove the ones that became wet, that your choshesh maybe became chametz, and the rest would be okay. Now, if you could find other grains, so then don't use any of the grain, even though you took away the ones that became wet, don't use the rest of the batch either, if you have other ones. But, right, so what should you do? You can leave those till after Pesach. You don't have to get rid of them. Again, in the first case it came wet in a bunch of places. In that case, the whole thing is a suffix of chametz, and therefore you shouldn't use it at all. But here it was a very controlled leak. You noticed in one area a drip. So you get rid of anything that could have gotten wet, and the rest of it, ideally, don't use. But if you have to, you could, in this case, or you could at least leave it till after Pesach. It's not considered chametz in itself because it's only a suffix of a suffix. You don't even know what got wet and if it became chametz. And even if it did, you don't know if it was bottle or mixed up in shishim or whatever. We don't want to rely on that, lechatchila, but if you had to, at least to keep it till after, you'd be able to do that. Okay. Siv Gimel. Now, by the way, this is what it talks about now, this is about how they store the flour. So it's very interesting to read some of the places, the things that they say. Let's say, for example, you can have the sacks of flour, which we'll get to a little bit later, but you shouldn't keep it on the floor because the floor is moist. So they put it on, from what I remember in the matzah bakery, they have it on pallets, like wooden pallets, so it's not on the floor. They say don't lean it against the wall because the wall sometimes gets moist, different change in temperature. Maybe not in Arizona, but in New York. So therefore, don't lean it against the wall. Different things they say about how to transport it, that you should be taking these things into account of being careful. But Siv Gimel. Another thing also is that when it comes to the mill, where they grind the grains into flour, so the minig is to be very, very careful in this case. Now, again, it's only a minute. Okay, well, let's see. Now, what would they do? So number one, the naker hativ, they would basically almost like sand it down. They would sand down any part of this mill that grinds the grains. they would sand the whole thing down, and they would clean it as best as they can. Now this, the Alter Rebbe adds, this is only if this would be if it's within 30 days of Pesach. Because within 30 days of Pesach, as we mentioned, there's a minig. Bichlal, this is a minig. There's nothing, you don't assume there's anything wrong with it. But because it's within 30 days of Pesach, so therefore, even though technically, even if there was chametz, it would be batal, like we said before. But within 30 days, you want to go above and beyond and make sure that there's mamish nothing there, and you try your best. But if it's before 30 days, you don't have to make such a gzeda for this. Yeah. This is the mill where they grind the grains into flour. So you clean the whole thing, obviously, you scrape it down and everything. And he's explaining that the chumras of this are really within 30 days. If it was before 30 days, it could be a bit more mako because it would be batal, even if there was a little bit of flour that became wet at some point. It's all mixed together. Anyways, you don't have to be concerned for it. 1 second. Was that? Yeah. Wait, hold on, was that? V'kisim loichin chadashin. Similar to that, also the bags that they use for the flour, for transporting the flour, ideally it should all be new ones. It should all be new ones. And then he says, now about this is interesting because when the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab were writing letters to different people about baking of the matzahs, so one of the questions the Rebbe Rashab asked in a few of the letters, and some of the instructions that he gave was to try to get new bags also to use. Meaning for the transportation. I mean, nowadays it's probably easy to get different sacks. It's not a big deal. But Amal, it probably was a much harder thing. So, but they would try to get new ones for Pesach as much as they can for the matzah shmura. Now, b'makom sheish talmidei chachamim, in a place where there's talmidei chachamim, as you guys learned yesterday. So hema holchim el rechayim, they themselves go to the place where they grind it lashkiach sheyachshar karot to see that it's done properly. In Lubavitch, you used to have the bachrim would do it. They would have a hand one. They were always afraid of the machine ones because the machine ones, they say it gets too hot, it goes too quickly, it can make a chametz quicker. I don't know. So they would do a hand one. There's a lot of interesting things at how it was done. Now, that's it. Well, what about a makom shein talmidei chachamim? What if there's no talmidei chachamim? So, everyone on themselves should take upon themselves to go check and make sure that everything they're getting is up to par. The mitzvah and in fact, there's actually an advantage to a person going themselves than relying on others. But then we have the Alter Rebbe where he says that those that are medaktik in mitzvahs, they go to supervise the whole process. And the Alter Rebbe doesn't quite say that it matters if there's Talmidei Chachamim or no, or maybe they don't. I forgot if the Alter Rebbe says it or that's what they're saying. But either way, people go themselves to make sure. And this is talking till today. You have families that go to the bakeries in Crown Heights or other places and they'll rent it out and they're part of the process. You don't see most families, maybe there's a few, but you don't see most people going to the fields and actually doing it, getting the wheat and grinding it and all that. But at least maybe some do, but at some point you see where families, will witness or be a part of the process, at least in the bakery when it's being baked. And this is where it comes from. There's an Indian, matzah gives you a lot of, the whole process. It infuses you with a lot of amunah and Yerushalayim. So it's a good thing to do. Now, the noyagin, the minig also is, the first batch of flour that comes out of the mill, which is done after the hechsher process within 30 days. Remember, we said if you go to a mill and you're going to use it to make flour for Pesach within 30 days, you have to sand and clean and do the whole thing. So the meaning became that the first batch, they wouldn't use it because it's possible that they didn't do such a good job and something was left. So at least this way, the first batch will get rid of that as well, and you use it before what? Within 30 days, yeah, because that's when they would do it. But either way, Rabbeinu Kasa, the Alter Rebbe has a little bit of a different perspective, and he says, "Achshav shenagu l'chaseis savev v'rechayim achar nikur." Nowadays, in those days, what they would do is they would cover over all the exposed parts of the mill with different burlap or linen types of things, and therefore yesh lahater gama kemachirish. He says we're not so concerned. So you see, when you go to the matzah bakeries. I say matzah bakers because it's a later point in the process, but that's what we see. They cover the table with paper that they keep on rolling away. They sand the sticks every time they use it, or at least every 18 minutes. They do a lot of things that can help out. So here the Alter Rebbe was saying the same thing. Amal, they would clean it, but they would leave stuff there. So therefore, at least the first batch, get rid of. But nowadays, they're careful. They cover it over. They do these types of things, so you don't have to be worried about it. So l'chura, nowadays I think they have dedicated, at least by us, we don't really use industrial mills. The matzah baker will have their own mill, a little machine or a little hand one, so you don't have these concerns. But Amal, they that's what they used to do. Yeah.
Myself, he was like sweating or not, and that sweat gone opposite of running myself.
So it's a good question. It's a very good question. I was actually thinking about it myself today because it does mention that during this whole process, Pesachim say you should be careful not to talk. So when you're grinding it, so you don't spit on it or anything. So you do well, yeah, but there's always the chash that there's things mixing with other things, and we try to lechatchila be careful, as we mentioned from the spit of the what's it called. We'll get to the sweat a little bit later because it does talk about an animal that sweats also is a chash of a concern. So we definitely try to be careful for it, but I guess they cover up. I don't know. You see, they're wearing they're wearing stuff. I don't know. I assume they're careful how they do it. It's usually pretty cool in there. It's the middle of the winter when they're doing this process still. It's not in the summer, but I guess they make sure. I don't know. It's a good question. I think they're careful for it. Okay, let's finish up here before for today. Then he said this: if it happens to be in the same mill, they're also grinding flour that's moist. Now, why would they make flour moist or the grains? Because it keeps it settled. Like when they spray when they're doing construction, they have a machine, a truck that goes around spraying water so the sand doesn't go everywhere. They legally make them do that. So here also they would make it a little bit moist because it keeps it. By the way, this is one of the reasons why we can't buy flour from a regular store. Just use natural 100% flour and make matzah out of it because they soak them all. They get them wet. They spray them. They do these things. So you can't. Their is gummer. You can't do it. Someone told me, unfortunately, that he went last year or maybe 2 years ago, and he bought flour from the store, and he was trying to be Ibra Chacham, I guess. He went and bought flour from the store, and he made his own kosher for Pesach something on Pesach. So then you can't do that. It's chametz gummer. The actual flour is already treated, and it's So over here also, let's say you're going to a place where the mill they would have it's a big warehouse. So they had one mill doing this, another mill doing that. So then, if you're doing your kosher for Pesach batch, you have to separate it with like a mechitza. So if it's in the same room, you have to cover it in some way because the flour kind of floats all over the place. Here, you see now, and they say quote from the Alter Rebbe where he says that don't even do it in the same house. Don't put a mechitza there. Don't do it. Even if they're far from each other. Because the little pieces, the little sand goes everywhere. If you ever went to these matzah rooms, the flour rooms upstairs in the matzah bakery, they come out, they're completely covered, they're here, everything. Because the little pieces, they go everywhere. So you can't rely on the fact that it's going to be controlled in one way. So another thing also, some of the poskim say is that when they're doing this, especially with the machine, make sure not to grind it for too long at a time, because the machine gets hot. And the machine gets hot, it heats it up. And if it heats it up, it could make the chimutz process happen faster. Also, there's different parts that you have to be careful about of the machinery to make sure that nothing stays there too long and it's cleaned out well. I think they say nowadays they clean them pretty well. And I think in Lubavitch they used to have one room where they would store the mill in the side or in a stove or somewhere. They would store it in the side room where they kept it the whole year wrapped up. So you have to be careful about that also. We mentioned about speaking. Also, this is also the way the Alter Rebbe writes it, I think, is if it's in a place where they make it wet. But if it's in a place where lav dafka do they make it wet, you can be a little more rakel. I think it's talking about where that they make their grains moist. So then you shouldn't do it. But if you don't know, it's okay. Why? Because again, it's all going to be batul b'shishim before Pesach. So you don't have to be so machmer. Again, nowadays they'll be machmer for all of these. They're going to have separate. But we're talking about when you didn't have access to so many options. Another example also you see about this idea is that in the matzah bakery, when they bring the matzah from one side to the other, though some matzah bakeries are built better that it's all one line. So the matzah that's baked will never come back crossing the water or going through. But in the matzah bakery in Crown Heights, crazy enough, after it's baked and everything, they literally come right through the whole matzah bakery. Number one, they're passing by sinks where water's spritzing. Number two, who knows what's on the floor okay, the floor is the floor. So they cover it over with something. When they walk past, they turn off the water. They do these things because things could get in the air. So you try to be careful as much as you can in this way. Okay, we'll stop here and we will continue.